Unaware she could buy his entire empire, the billionaire CEO told her to sign the divorce papers and stop being. He did not even close his laptop. That is the detail she will remember for the rest of her life. Not the folder, not the cold language printed on legal paper, not the way afternoon light fell across his mahogany desk like it was trying to bless something that had already died. She will remember that her husband, the man she had loved for 3 years, he kept his laptop open while ending their marriage. Stock projections glowing on one screen, her sitting on the other side of the desk, and she was not the priority screen. The folder slid toward her. 2 fingers, the way someone pushes a restaurant check toward the person who lost the bet. I have had my attorney draft everything. His voice was casual, rehearsed, almost bored. It is fair. More than fair, actually. You keep the house. Obviously, I am not trying to make this ugly. Tara, she stared at the folder. She had not opened it yet. She already knew what was inside. She had known for weeks, maybe months. But knowing something is coming and feeling it arrive are 2 completely different experiences. And right now, sitting across from this man in the home office she had helped him design, her chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything warm and left only the architecture of her ribs to hold her upright. He finally looked at her. No anger in his expression. No guilt either, just mild impatience, like she was a meeting running 5 minutes over schedule. Most women in your position would be grateful. I am being reasonable here. That word, position, as if she were applying for something, as if she were receiving charity from the man she had spent 3 years quietly building alongside. She opened the folder. The word swam. Petition for dissolution of marriage. 3 years compressed into a document thinner than the business proposals she had helped him rewrite at this very desk. Is there someone else? Her voice came out barely above a whisper, a question dressed in dignity when everything underneath was fracturing in slow motion. He paused, half a second. But she had been married to this man for 3 years. She knew the architecture of his silences. She knew when he was choosing words carefully, and she knew when he was deciding how much truth she deserved. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Now, let us go back to that office. Back to the silence after her question. Back to the half-second pause that told her everything his words were about to confirm. His name was Vincent Prescott, 58 years old, billionaire CEO of Prescott Development Group, a man whose face appeared on magazine covers beside words like visionary disruptor and the architect of modern skylines. His net worth hovered around $3.4 billion, and he carried that number the way some men carry cologne. Yes, you could smell it before he entered the room. And the woman sitting across from him, the woman he was currently handing divorce papers to with the emotional investment of someone returning a library book, was named Lenora, his wife, the woman he had pursued, the woman he had proposed to, the woman he was now discarding because she no longer fit the narrative he was building about himself. I have been spending time with someone, Vincent said finally. Her name is Vivian. She has been consulting on the Pacific Tower acquisition. We have gotten close. She understands what it takes to operate at this level. Operating at this level, as if love were an elevator and Lenora had gotten off at the wrong floor. Vivian Hale. Lenora had met her 3 times. A venture capitalist with eyes like polished steel and a smile that could cut glass. The kind of woman who assessed every room she entered for leverage and dismissed anyone who could not provide it. And at the last charity gala, Vivian had looked at Lenora the way someone glances at furniture, noted the presence, evaluated the quality, moved on. So you are asking me to sign divorce papers because your business consultant understands you better than your wife does, Lenora said. No inflection, no trembling. She was not asking. She was holding a mirror up to his words so he could hear how they sounded reflected back. Vincent shifted in his leather chair. Do not make it sound like that. Wait, you are a wonderful person, Lenora. You have been a great companion. But I am building something massive here. I need a partner who gets it, who lives and breathes this world. You are happy with your art galleries and your little restoration projects. There is nothing wrong with that. It is just not what I need anymore. Companion. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not partner, not wife. Not the woman who quietly restructured your entire Pacific Tower pitch while you slept last spring. Companion. Like she was a pleasant accessory he had outgrown. A comfortable coat he was donating to make room in his closet for something sharper. And then came the part that nearly broke her. The house is worth about $4 million, Vincent continued, already glancing at his phone. You will be set up comfortably. You can take your time figuring out what you want to do next. Set up comfortably. Sooner like she was a retiring employee receiving a severance package. Like a subscription service he was canceling, but generously allowing one final month of access. Lenora stood. Her legs felt strange beneath her, distant, as though she were operating her own body from somewhere outside herself. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere the word companion did not echo against every wall. I will have my attorney review the documents, she said. Vincent's eyebrows lifted. Not much, just enough. But the surprise was genuine, and that tiny flash of confusion told Lenora more about her marriage than 3 years of shared meals ever had. The idea that she might seek independent legal counsel had not occurred to him. In his mind, she was someone who needed to be managed, guided, settled comfortably. The possibility that she could manage herself was a language he had never bothered to learn. You have an attorney, he asked? Such a small question. Such a devastating revelation packed inside it. 3 years of marriage, and he could not imagine her possessing the basic autonomy of hiring a lawyer. I will get one, Lenora said. She walked out of the office. Down the hallway she had decorated. Past the kitchen she had redesigned. Past the living room where she had hosted the dinner parties that built half his investor relationships. Out the front door into the late afternoon light that did not care whether her marriage was ending. She did not cry. She did not shake. She just walked. Behind her she heard the sound of Vincent picking up his phone before she reached her car. Already back to business. Already moving on. She had not even made it to the driveway and she was already past tense in his day. But something had shifted inside Lenora. Something small. Something irreversible. Like a hairline crack in a dam that looks like nothing from the outside, but changes the entire structure of what is being held back. For the first time in 3 years, she had disrupted his script. It was not much, but it was a beginning. Lenora drove without destination, hands on the steering wheel. Mind somewhere outside the car, hovering above the city like a bird watching its own nest burn from a safe distance. The streets scrolled past. Buildings Vincent had financed. Neighborhoods his company had reshaped. The entire landscape of a life she had been living like a role in someone else's movie. She was the background extra in the story of Vincent Prescott, and the director had just told her the scene was cut. She thought about the beginning, the technology summit 3 years ago. She had registered under her mother's maiden name because she had wanted one evening of anonymity. One night where no one calculated the weight of her father's invisible empire before deciding whether she was worth talking to. One dinner where the sharp glint of strategic networking did not enter people's eyes the moment they connected her face to a family whose holdings stretched across continents and generations. Vincent had approached her with the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he considered relevant. He talked about reshaping skylines, about buildings that did not yet exist, his hands moving through the air like a conductor directing an orchestra only he could hear. He was intoxicating. Not because of his money, but because of his certainty. He looked at the world like it was clay waiting for his hands. He had asked what she did, and Lenora had given him the truth, just not the complete truth. I consult for cultural institutions. I studied art history and economics. My family values privacy. All accurate, none of it sufficient. She had wanted to know if someone could choose her, just her, without the weight of her last name pulling the scales, without the calculation that entered people's eyes when they learned who her father was, without the strategic maneuvering, the careful cultivation, the unspoken question of what access she could provide. Vincent had chosen her. He had pursued her with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for acquisitions. He had proposed after 9 months with a ring. He had selected himself in a speech about building a future together that had made her cry. And Lenora had said yes, heart pounding with hope, conscience whispering warnings she refused to hear. She would tell him after the wedding. That was the plan. Once they were married, once he had chosen her completely, she would explain the omission and he would understand. He would maybe even admire the test. He would see that she had wanted their foundation to be real, built on connection rather than calculation. But the wedding came and went, small, elegant, her parents attending with quiet dignity. Vincent's family and friends seeing wealth but not understanding its full scope. And the right moment to tell him never arrived. It hovered at the edges of 100 conversations, and she let it pass every single time. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years, and the truth sat between them like a wall she had built one silent brick at a time, until the wall was so high she could not see over it anymore, and he had never even noticed it was there. Lenora found herself pulling into the parking lot of a coffee shop she had never visited. She went inside, ordered tea she would not drink, sat by the window watching strangers live their ordinary, uncomplicated lives. A couple argued gently over a menu. A mother wiped chocolate from her daughter's chin. A man read a newspaper and laughed at something only he found funny. The whole world continuing as though nothing had changed. And for everyone except Lenora, nothing had. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vincent's assistant. Mr. Prescott wanted me to send you the contact information for his attorney in case you need a referral for representation. Even her legal protection he was trying to manage, offering to help her find a lawyer as though she were too helpless to locate one herself. As if the attorney he recommended would not quietly protect his interests while making her feel taken care of. The gesture looked generous. It was actually a leash. Lenora deleted the text. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had not called in 3 years. A name she had deliberately avoided because calling it meant acknowledging the life she had put on hold. Richard Morse, her father's chief advisor, the man who managed wealth that most people could not conceptualize, wealth that operated so far above the public skyline that it cast no visible shadow. She stared at the name for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the call button the way someone's hand hovers over a door they know they cannot unopen. Then she pressed it. Richard answered on the second ring, just her name, spoken with warmth and relief and absolutely no surprise, as if he had been sitting beside that phone for 3 years, waiting with the patience of a man who understood that some calls cannot be rushed. Lenora. It is good to hear from you, he said, and he meant it. She could hear 3 years of restrained concern in those 7 words. I need information, Lenora said, about my trust, about my position in the family structure, everything. There was a pause, not hesitation, not surprise, relief, pure, undisguised relief. He had been waiting for this call the way a doctor waits for a patient to finally agree to the treatment that could save them. Of course. When would you like to meet? They scheduled for the following morning. Lenora hung up and stared at her reflection in the coffee shop window. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized, smaller somehow, quieter, like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long, the colors fading to something soft and indistinct. She thought about Vincent's words, companion, comfortable, simple, little restoration projects. She thought about Vivian Hale, loud and strategic, and everything Lenora had spent 3 years deliberately not being. And she thought about her father. A man whose power was so vast it did not need to announce itself. A man who had taught her that true wealth operates in silence, that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. She had been silent, but silence and invisibility are not the same thing. She had confused them. Vincent had confused them. And now the silence was ending. Lenora drove home to the house Vincent had so generously agreed to let her keep. A $4 million consolation prize from a man who had no idea that the woman he was settling could buy every building on his skyline and still have enough left over to buy the skyline next to it. That night she lay alone in their bed. Vincent was working late, or with Vivian, or somewhere that did not include her. It did not matter which. What mattered was that for the first time in 3 years, the absence did not hurt. It just clarified. Lenora was finally done waiting to be seen. And the next morning she woke alone. Vincent's side of the bed had not been slept in. No text, no explanation, no apology. A year ago, she would have worried. 6 months ago, she would have felt the sharp edge of rejection. This morning, she just noticed the absence the way you notice a painting has been removed from a wall. The space is different. You register it, you move on. She dressed with intention, not the soft, invisible clothes she had defaulted to for 3 years, the muted tones and easy fabrics of a woman trying not to take up too much space. Instead, she chose a suit she had not worn since before the wedding. Tailored, precise, charcoal gray with a cut that communicated competence without effort. In the mirror, she looked like someone she used to know, or maybe like a version of herself she had folded up and placed in a drawer, waiting for the day she would be needed again. That day had arrived. The office where she met Richard bore no signage. It occupied the 14th floor of a building downtown that housed dozens of companies, anonymous and unremarkable from the street. The kind of building you walk past 1,000 times without wondering what happens inside. That was by design. The most significant power in the world does not advertise. The lobby was quiet. A receptionist greeted Lenora by name without checking a list. That small detail, the instant recognition, the absence of verification, said more about who Lenora was than any introduction could. Richard met her personally at the elevator. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, calm in the way of a man who had negotiated with presidents and heads of state and never once felt the need to mention it. His handshake was warm, his eyes were kind, and beneath the professional composure, Lenora could see something that nearly undid her. He was glad she had come. "You look well," he said. She knew he was being kind. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had just discovered her marriage was built on a foundation of sand and the tide was coming in. They sat in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The city spread below them, gleaming and indifferent. Richard slid a portfolio across the table. No dramatic presentation, no build-up, just information, delivered the way he delivered everything, with precision, clarity, and respect for the person receiving it. "Your trust has performed exceptionally well," he began. "Your father's investments in emerging technologies, sustainable infrastructure, and strategic acquisitions have more than tripled the initial allocation since your wedding. Current liquid accessible assets total approximately $9.2 billion. Lenora absorbed this number. Let it settle into her understanding like a stone sinking slowly through water. $9.2 billion. Vincent's entire net worth, due to the fortune that put him on magazine covers, the wealth that made him a fixture at every power dinner in the city, was estimated at $3.4 billion. He was considered enormously successful. One of the most prominent developers on the Eastern Seaboard. His wife's accessible trust fund was nearly 3 times that number, and he had no idea. That is before touching the primary family holdings, Richard continued. His voice was steady, factual, but Lenora could hear the weight beneath every word. Your position in the succession structure remains unchanged. You are the sole heir. When your father decides to transition leadership, you will inherit full control of assets currently valued at approximately $230 billion. $230 billion. The number was so large it almost stopped meaning anything. Like trying to hold the ocean in your hands. You know it is real. You know it is massive. But your mind cannot contain it all at once. You have immediate access to the trust, Richard said. No approval required. Your father ensured that when you turned 25. He wanted you to have independence regardless of circumstances. Independence. Lenora almost laughed. She had spent 3 years performing dependence, making herself small, waiting for a man worth $3.4 billion to notice the worth of a woman sitting on $9.2 billion who had never once mentioned it. Now there was a long silence. Lenora looked out the window at the city, Vincent's city, or at least the city he believed was his. "I need an attorney," she said, "for a divorce. Someone who handles high net worth dissolutions. Someone Vincent will not know. Someone he cannot anticipate." Richard did not blink. "I will have 3 names for you by this afternoon. All discreet, all exceptionally competent, all unconnected to your husband's professional network. Thank you." Richard leaned forward slightly. His expression shifted from professional to personal. "Your father has been worried about you. He has respected your privacy, He has respected your choice not to involve the family in your marriage, but he has wanted you to reach out. He has been waiting, Lenora. Something in her chest loosened, a knot she had not realized she had been carrying. Tell him I am okay. Tell him I will call him soon. He will be glad to hear it. Lenora stood to leave. Richard walked her to the elevator. Then before the doors opened, he paused. One more thing, he said. The Pacific Tower acquisition, your husband's signature project, the deal he has been working on for the past 18 months. Lenora nodded. She knew it intimately. She had listened to Vincent discuss it for hundreds of hours. She had asked questions that helped him reframe his entire approach. She had watched him solve problems she had quietly pointed him toward, one and then take full credit for the solutions as though they had materialized from his own brilliance. The primary funding consortium includes several investment groups, Richard said. One of them is a shell company called Apex Meridian Holdings. Apex Meridian is owned by a larger entity called Silverstone Capital, and Silverstone Capital is a subsidiary of your family's holdings. We control approximately 31% of the total investment in that project. Lenora went very still. When the elevator arrived, the doors opened. She did not step inside. Does Vincent know? The investment was made through multiple layers of corporate structure, Richard said. There is no reason he would have connected it to your family. We have been funding urban development projects for decades. This was simply part of our standard portfolio diversification. But the timing, the poetry of it, the unbearable, almost cruel symmetry. Vincent was building his legacy, his crowning achievement, hid partially on Lenora's family money, while telling her she did not understand his world, while offering her a $4 million settlement as though it were a generous act, while replacing her with a woman who understood what it takes to operate at this level. His level was built on her foundation, and he had no idea. Thank you, Richard, Lenora said quietly. She rode the elevator down, walked through the unremarkable lobby, stepped out into the city, the same buildings, the same streets, the same sunlight falling on the same concrete, but everything looked different now. She had always had power. She had just forgotten she was allowed to use it. That evening there was a corporate dinner, one of Vincent's professional obligations, the kind of event where wives and partners were expected to arrive looking elegant, smile at the right moments, laugh at the right jokes, and never, under any circumstances, interrupt the important conversations happening around them. Lenora almost did not go. She sat in the bedroom for 20 minutes, staring at the closet, weighing the comfort of absence against the power of presence. Hiding would be easier. Hiding was what she had been doing for 3 years. Hiding was the role Vincent had written for her, and she had performed it flawlessly. But then she thought about that word, companion. She thought about the folder on his desk, the open laptop, the stock projections that mattered more than the woman sitting across from him. She decided to show up. She wore a dress purchased with her own money, from a designer who knew her family, who had recognized the name her mother had quietly mentioned years ago and had been honored to dress her. The dress was not flashy, it was not loud. It was the kind of garment that communicated wealth so deep it did not need to announce itself. The fabric moved like water. The cut was architectural. She looked like a woman who belonged wherever she chose to stand. When Lenora arrived at the restaurant, Vincent was already there, holding court at the head of a long table surrounded by developers, investors, and the various satellites that orbited his professional gravity. Vivian stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm with the casual possessiveness of someone staking a public claim. She wore red. Of course she did. Red that demanded attention. Red that said, I am here, and I intend to be noticed. Vincent saw Lenora, and something flickered across his face. Surprise. He had expected her to stay home, to hide in the humiliation of being replaced, to begin the quiet process of disappearing from his life the way he had already begun disappearing her from his stories. But here she was, dressed impeccably, expression pleasant, unrevealing, taking her seat at the table as though nothing in her world had shifted. And the dinner proceeded as these dinners always did. Business dominated the conversation. Market projections, zoning challenges, the Pacific Tower deal, and its potential to transform the entire downtown corridor. Vincent was animated, energized, performing his favorite role, the visionary architect of the city's future. Vivian contributed sharp observations. challenged him in ways that made him laugh. Their dynamic was obvious and deliberate. She was performing intelligence loudly enough for him to notice, and he was performing appreciation loudly enough for the table to see. Lenora watched them, and she understood the dynamic with a clarity that was almost clinical. Vivian performed capability the way some people perform confidence, loud enough to fill a room. Lenora had offered hers quietly, and Vincent had absorbed it without acknowledgement. The difference between them was not intelligence. It was volume. "Lenora, you are so quiet tonight," one of the other wives said during a lull. "Everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I am just listening." Across the table, Vincent's business partner, a man named Gerald who had always treated Lenora with the kind of polite dismissal reserved for decorative objects, launched into a story about Vincent's brilliance. "The consortium was ready to walk," Gerald said, leaning back with the satisfied grin of someone retelling a legend. "No, the risk assessment had them completely spooked. But Vincent, this man right here, he reframed the entire approach, showed them how the infrastructure improvements would increase property values in a 3-mile radius, how the initial investment would be recouped within 7 years instead of 12. Completely changed the narrative. Genius. Absolute genius." The table murmured approval. Vivian beamed. Vincent accepted the praise with practiced humility, with the kind of humility that is actually a more sophisticated form of pride. And Lenora listened to this story, and she remembered. She remembered the night 11 months ago when Vincent had been pacing this very office, frustrated, unable to crack the consortium's resistance. She remembered sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, listening to him talk in circles. And she remembered asking a single question. What if you positioned it not as a development risk, but as an infrastructure investment? What if you showed them the secondary value creation rather than the primary return? Vincent had stopped pacing, had stared at her, had grabbed his laptop and started recalculating projections that same night. The next morning, he had presented the reframed approach to the consortium. In every retelling since, it had been his instinct, his breakthrough, his genius. And Lenora had said nothing, because she had told herself that credit did not matter, that partnership meant supporting without scorekeeping, that love meant letting him shine even when the light was borrowed. But now, sitting at this table, listening to Gerald praise the genius of an idea she had handed to her husband on a quiet Tuesday evening, listening to Vivian comment on Vincent's extraordinary strategic vision, something shifted inside Lenora. Not anger, something clearer than anger. Clarity. "Actually," Lenora said, her voice cut through the conversation the way a single clear note cuts through noise. Not loud, just precise. "That reframing came from a question I asked Vincent during his initial pitch development. I suggested positioning infrastructure value over development risk. I recommended the 7-year recapture comparison. I pointed him toward the urban planning study that supported the infrastructure claims." The table went silent. Every head turned toward her. Forks paused midair. Ink glasses stopped halfway to lips. Vincent's expression went carefully neutral. The kind of neutral that requires enormous effort to maintain. "Lenora has always been supportive," he said smoothly. "She listens to me talk through strategy sometimes. It helps me think." "I do not just listen," Lenora said. Her tone was still pleasant. She was not arguing. She was not raising her voice. She was simply correcting the record with the calm precision of someone reading facts from a page. "I helped you restructure the entire approach. The 7-year model was my suggestion. The infrastructure pivot was my framework. I have been doing this kind of consultation for 3 years." Vivian's smile sharpened. "That is sweet that you take such an interest in Vincent's work." "It is not interest," Lenora said, meeting Vivian's eyes with a steadiness that made the other woman's smile falter. "It is consultation. There is a difference." Gerald shifted uncomfortably. One of the other investors, a woman who had barely looked at Lenora all evening, turned to study her with new attention. The air at the table had changed. Something invisible had cracked, and everyone could feel the draft coming through. Vincent redirected the conversation with the smooth expertise of a man who had spent his entire career controlling narratives. He pivoted to another deal, another opportunity, and the table followed his lead because That is what tables do when a powerful man changes the subject. But the crack remained. Hairline thin, almost invisible, but structural. And Lenora sat there, visible in a way she had not been in years, and did not say another word for the rest of the dinner. She did not need to. The seed had been planted. The correction had been entered into the record. And for the first time in 3 years, the people at that table were looking at her and seeing something other than Vincent Prescott's quiet, pleasant wife. When the dinner ended, Vincent pulled her aside while Vivian was in the restroom. His hand closed around her elbow, firm but controlled. "What was that?" he asked quietly. His tone was not angry. It was confused, as though a piece of furniture he had been sitting on comfortably for years had suddenly spoken. "The truth," Lenora said. "You made it sound like you were some kind of silent partner in my business. Have I not been?" Vincent stared at her. She could see him trying to reconcile two images. Adori, the woman he had married, quiet and undemanding, and the woman standing in front of him now, who had just publicly claimed credit for the strategic framework behind his most important deal. "You are upset about the divorce," he said finally. "I get it. But do not try to rewrite history to make yourself feel better." There it was. The dismissal dressed as empathy. She was emotional. She was rewriting. She was making herself feel better. The possibility that she was simply stating facts did not occur to him, because facts in his worldview only came from people he considered credible. And Lenora had never been credible to him. She had been convenient. "I am not rewriting anything," Lenora said. "I am just tired of watching you erase me from stories we built together." She turned and walked away, down the corridor, through the restaurant, out into the night air that smelled like rain and possibility. Behind her, Vincent stood alone. He's looking like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he thought. Lenora drove home, opened her laptop, emailed the 3 attorneys Richard had recommended, scheduled consultations. Then she did something she had never done before. She began documenting every contribution she had made to Vincent's business over the past 3 years. Every strategic suggestion, every reframing, every connection she had facilitated. Every question she had asked that redirected his thinking. Every problem she had quietly solved while he took public credit for the solution. The list was longer than she expected. Much longer. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. "We need to talk." "You are not being rational." Lenora read it, considered it, deleted it. She had never been more rational in her life, and that was exactly what terrified him. Not her emotion, her clarity, because emotion he could dismiss. Clarity he could not. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, lay down in the bed that was hers alone now, in the house that was worth $4 million in a city where her family's holdings were worth $230 billion. And she thought about what was coming. The forensic accounting, the asset disclosure. The moment when Vincent Prescott, the self-made visionary, the architect of modern skylines, we would discover that the wife he had dismissed as simple was the heir to a fortune that made his empire look like a single room in a mansion he could not imagine. She did not smile. She did not feel triumph. She just felt clear. And clarity, she was learning, was the most dangerous thing a woman could possess. 3 days later, Vincent received the counter-proposal from Lenora's attorney. She was not home when it happened. She had deliberately scheduled a meeting with the museum board to discuss her cultural access initiative, a project she had been developing quietly for months. A framework for expanding public access to private art collections, connecting institutions with collectors who had historically kept their acquisitions hidden from the world. It was sophisticated work, strategic, the kind of thinking that required both financial acumen and cultural sensitivity. The kind of thinking Vincent had never asked her about because he had already decided what she was capable of. He called her 17 times before she finally answered. "What is this?" His voice was tight, barely controlled. The voice of a man who had opened a document expecting compliance and found resistance instead. "A counter-proposal," Lenora said calmly, "with a request for forensic accounting of all marital assets. You want to audit my entire business? I want an accurate assessment of what we built during this marriage. That is standard procedure in high-asset dissolutions. My attorney advised thoroughness. Your attorney is trying to run up billable hours. My attorney is protecting my interests. That is what attorneys do. It is what yours does for you. This is going to delay everything by months. Is that what you want? To drag this out, I want accuracy. If accuracy takes time, then it takes time. She could hear him breathing hard through the phone. She could picture him pacing his office, the way he always paced when something did not go according to his projections. Vincent Prescott did not handle deviation well. His entire life was built on the assumption that he could predict and control outcomes. And Lenora had just introduced a variable he had not modeled. "You are doing this to punish me," he said, "because of Vivian. I am doing this because I am worth doing it correctly for." Well, that is all. She hung up before he could respond. Not out of anger, out of completion. The conversation had said everything it needed to say, and she was no longer interested in giving him space to rewrite it. Her meeting with the museum board went exceptionally well. They loved her proposal. The framework was elegant, practical, and visionary in a way that made everyone in the room lean forward. They voted unanimously to move forward with a pilot program, and they asked if she would consider joining the board formally. Lenora said she would think about it, but inside something warm unfolded in her chest. Recognition, not from a husband who could not see her, from professionals who could. That night there was another event, a charity gala, the kind of massive, glittering affair where Vincent's entire professional world would be present. Crystal chandeliers, 5-course meals, her speeches about changing the world delivered by people who mostly wanted to be seen caring about it. It was also, Lenora learned through a mutual friend, the event where Vincent planned to appear publicly with Vivian. A soft announcement, the polished introduction of his next chapter, delivered with the implicit message that his previous chapter had been closed gracefully and without complication. Lenora considered not attending. She stood in front of her closet for a long time, her hand resting on a dress she had not worn in over a year, weighing the seduction of invisibility against the cost of it. Then she thought about Vincent's certainty, his absolute, unshakable belief that she would fade quietly, that she would take the settlement, keep the house, and dissolve into the background of his life like morning fog burning off under the sun of his ambition. She decided to show up. The dress cost more than most people's annual salary. Art purchased from a designer who had recognized her family name and moved her to the front of a waiting list that stretched months. Her mother had introduced them years ago. The designer had been honored to dress a woman from the family, even secretly. The gown was midnight blue, not flashy, not loud, the kind of garment that whispered instead of shouted, but whispered in a language that only people with real power understood. She arrived alone, deliberately late, and walked into the ballroom like she had been born in it. Because in a way, she had. The charity being celebrated tonight operated partially on funding from her family's foundation. Vincent did not know this. He had never asked about her philanthropic connections. He had never asked about most things. The room noticed her entrance. Heads turned. Not dramatically, subtly, the way a room registers a shift in atmospheric pressure. She looked different tonight. Not smaller, not quieter, present. Fully unapologetically present. Vincent saw her from across the room. He was standing with Vivian, who wore emerald green tonight, bold and territorial. His expression when he spotted Lenora was complicated. Confusion, irritation, and something underneath both that he would never admit to. Something that might have been the first flicker of doubt. Lenora did not approach him. She moved through the room having real conversations with people who, it turned out, had always found her interesting. She had just never given them space to say so. She had been so busy being invisible that she had not noticed the people who had been trying to see her all along. A museum director approached her, someone she had consulted with privately on several acquisitions over the past 2 years. "Lenora, I heard about your Access initiative. It is brilliant. Exactly what this industry needs. Thank you. I am genuinely excited about it. I also heard you are looking at formal board positions. We would be honored if you would consider ours." They spoke for 15 minutes. Real conversation, strategic analysis, mutual respect. The director treated Lenora like an expert because she was one. She had always been one. The only person who had not known this was the man she had married. Across the room, Vincent watched. Vivian said something to him and he nodded, but his attention kept drifting back to his wife. The wife who was supposed to be home. The wife who was supposed to be hurt. And the wife who was currently engaged in deep strategic conversation with one of the most respected figures in the cultural sector, being treated not as a plus one but as a peer. Later in the evening, Lenora was approached by a man she did not recognize. He was older, impeccably dressed, silver at the temples. He carried the quiet authority of someone whose phone calls could reshape markets. Not the loud authority of self-promotion, the silent authority of actual consequence. "Miss Whitmore," he said. Lenora's heart skipped. That name, her real name, not Prescott. "I am James from the investment board for the Pacific Tower Consortium," he continued. "Your father and I have worked together for years. I have been hoping to meet you." They shook hands. It was a brief interaction. Pleasant, professional. But Vincent noticed from across the room. He saw Lenora speaking with a man whose firm controlled hundreds of billions in assets, on a man whose single decision could make or break projects like Pacific Tower. And he saw the way this man treated Lenora, not as a billionaire's wife making small talk, as an equal. Vincent excused himself from Vivian and approached. "Lenora, I did not realize you knew Mr. Chen," he said, inserting himself into the conversation with practiced ease. "We just met," Lenora said. "I have known Lenora's family for quite some time," James said. His tone was warm but precise. "And I am glad to finally meet her in person." Vincent processed this. "You know her family?" "Yes. Her father and I have collaborated on several ventures over the years. The Whitmores are remarkable people." And there it was. The name. Out in the open. Falling through the air between them like a stone dropped from a great height. Lenora watched Vincent's face. She saw the exact moment the information landed. The brief flash of recognition, the confusion that followed, and then the beginning of something she had never seen on his face before. Calculation directed at her. He did not show it openly. He was too controlled for that. But she knew him. She knew the micro-expression that meant his mind was running projections, assessing variables, recalculating value. "I did not realize Lenora's family was involved in venture capital," Vincent said carefully. His voice sounded casual. His eyes were anything but. "Among other things," James said with a slight smile, "at your Pacific Tower project is impressive, by the way. Exactly the kind of urban renewal initiative we look for, though I imagine having Lenora's insights helped. She has her father's instincts for long-term value creation." Vincent glanced at Lenora. She kept her expression pleasant, a wall of calm. "Lenora has always been supportive," he said, defaulting to his standard line, the comfortable script, the one where she was background. "I would call it more than support," James said. "Watch the Whitmores do not do anything halfway. I am sure her contributions have been substantial." Someone called James away. He excused himself with a handshake and a warm nod to Lenora. And then they were alone. Husband and wife, standing in a ballroom full of people, the truth sitting between them like a live wire. "Whitmore," Vincent said quietly. "Your father is a Whitmore." "Yes. You never told me? You never asked." 4 words, simple, devastating, because they were true. In 3 years of marriage, Vincent had never once asked Lenora about her family in any meaningful way. He had accepted the surface. He had liked the surface. The surface had been convenient. "Why would James Chen know your father?" Vincent pressed. "Because they work in similar industries. Investment, development, wealth management. The same things you do, Vincent, just on a different scale." "What scale?" Lenora met his eyes. She held his gaze with a steadiness that made him look away first. "Does it matter? What, you are divorcing me because I do not understand your world. My family's business does not change that, but it does change it." She could see the shift happening in real time. Not remorse, not regret, recalculation. He was not looking at her and seeing the woman he had failed to value. He was looking at her and seeing a resource he had failed to exploit. And somehow that was worse. "We should talk," he said. "Privately. We are talking. And I do not think there is anything left to discuss outside of legal channels. You wanted a divorce. I have agreed to one. My attorney is preparing the asset documentation. Everything is proceeding exactly as you requested." She excused herself before he could respond, walked away, found a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool against her skin. Below, the lights spread out like scattered promises. Some kept, most broken. Her phone buzzed. Her attorney. The accounting is revealing some significant financial structures. We should discuss before the next filing. Can you meet Monday? Lenora confirmed. Behind her, the gala continued. Vincent and Vivian somewhere inside, performing their new beginning. The whole world spinning exactly as it was. But Lenora was no longer spinning with it. She was standing still, finally in the center of her own gravity. Monday arrived with rain. Lenora sat in the conference room at her attorney's office. Karen Voss was a woman in her 50s with steel gray eyes and the calm precision of someone who had spent 3 decades winning cases that other attorneys considered unwinnable. She did not raise her voice. She did not posture. She simply knew more than everyone else in the room and let that knowledge do the work. The forensic accounting has been completed, Karen said, sliding a document across the table. Your husband's Pacific Tower acquisition is funded by a consortium of investment groups. One of them is a shell company called Apex Meridian Holdings. Lenora nodded. Apex Meridian is owned by Silverstone Capital. Silverstone Capital is a subsidiary of Whitmore Holdings. Your family controls approximately 31% of the total investment in your husband's most significant project. Karen looked at Lenora directly. He has been building his legacy on your family's money while telling you that you do not understand his world. I am aware of the irony. So Noah, this changes everything strategically, Karen said. When this information becomes part of the formal asset disclosure, your husband will understand exactly who you are. His professional circle will understand. The narrative he has constructed about outgrowing you will collapse under the weight of the facts. I do not want to weaponize this, Lenora said. I just want an accurate accounting. Fair and strategic are not mutually exclusive. We can protect your interest without turning this into a war. But you should be prepared for his reaction. Men who build identities around being the most powerful person in every room do not handle this kind of revelation gracefully. He is the one who wanted the divorce, Lenora said. He is the one who decided I was not enough. I am simply making sure the separation reflects reality rather than his assumptions about my worth. Karen nodded. Then let the truth do its work. The groundbreaking celebration for Pacific Tower arrived 2 weeks later, when this was Vincent's crowning moment. 18 months of planning, negotiating, persuading, and performing had led to this night. A luxury hotel ballroom packed with hundreds of guests, champagne flowing, massive architectural renderings of the project displayed on screens that stretched floor to ceiling. Every person who mattered in Vincent's professional world was in this room. Lenora arrived wearing a gown that cost more than a mid-range car. Jewelry from her mother's collection, understated, are elegant, the kind of beauty that does not compete for attention because it has never needed to. She checked in at the reception desk. The attendant looked at the name on the list, and something in her expression shifted. A subtle straightening of the spine, a softening of the voice. Miss Whitmore, welcome. The consortium director asked me to direct you to the VIP reception when you arrived. Not Mrs. Prescott. Miss Whitmore. The VIP reception was a private room adjacent to the main ballroom. This was where the real power gathered before the public performance began. Lenora walked in and was greeted by James, who introduced her to the other consortium members with genuine warmth. These were people who manage hundreds of billions, people whose decisions shape cities and markets and sometimes entire economies. And they treated Lenora not with polite tolerance, but with the kind of respect that has nothing to do with manners and everything to do with recognition of genuine capability. Your father's instincts for urban renewal are extraordinary, one investor said. I understand you have inherited that same strategic vision. I have learned from him, Lenora replied, but I have developed my own perspective. They discussed market trends, infrastructure investment, the long-term implications of projects like Pacific Tower. Lenora contributed analysis, asked questions, offered frameworks. She engaged as an equal because she was one. The door opened. Mas Vincent entered with Vivian on his arm. He had clearly been told about the VIP reception. This was where the important conversations happened. This was where he needed to be. He stopped when he saw Lenora. She was not sitting alone in a corner. She was not hovering at the edge of a conversation. She was standing with the consortium director and three of the most powerful investors in the room, actively contributing to a discussion about urban development strategy. They were listening to her, not politely, intently. Vincent approached. His smile was calibrated, controlled. James, thank you for organizing this evening. The consortium's support has been essential. The project merits it, James said. He paused and then added with the casual precision of a man who understood the weight of every word he spoke. Though I think you know, Lenora was instrumental in our initial assessment. Vincent's smile froze. I am sorry, he said. Lenora's preliminary analysis of the infrastructure value proposition was part of our investment review, James continued. Her insights about secondary market development were particularly compelling. Lenora remembered now. Months ago, Richard had forwarded her the Pacific Tower proposal and asked for her thoughts. She had reviewed it casually, made detailed notes about positioning and value framing, sent them back without thinking much of it. She had not realized her analysis had been included in the consortium's formal investment decision. I did not know that, Vincent said slowly. The carefully maintained smile had collapsed into something flat and unreadable. She did not mention it. James looked genuinely surprised. The framework you presented to us about the 7-year value recapture versus the 12-year projection, that came directly from her analysis. The room shifted. The consortium members were listening now. The air changed the way air changes before a storm, charged and electric, and full of information that had not yet been spoken aloud. Vincent had unknowingly pitched Lenora's ideas back to the people she had written them for. He had presented her strategic framework as his own breakthrough to a consortium that had received it first from her pen. The full circle of it was almost too precise to be accidental. It felt like the universe correcting a record that had been falsified for too long. Had Vivian sensed the shift? She stepped forward with her sharpest smile. How wonderful that Lenora could contribute, she said. Though I am sure the execution complexity was well beyond the scope of her involvement. James turned to Vivian. His expression went cold in a way that made the temperature in the room drop by several degrees. Miss Whitmore holds advanced degrees in economics and art history. She has consulted on acquisition strategy for some of the most sophisticated collectors and institutions in the world. Complexity is well within her scope. Vivian's smile became rigid. Of course, I did not mean to imply otherwise. Lenora has been too modest about her role in this project, James continued, and now he was addressing the room, not just the conversation. Without her initial framework, we might not have structured the investment at all. The main program was about to begin, when an assistant appeared to announce that the ballroom was ready, but the information had already spread through the VIP reception like ripples from a stone dropped in deep water. Every person in that room was recalculating, reassessing, looking at Lenora and seeing someone they had never noticed before. Not because she had changed, because they were finally looking. Vincent gave his speech. It was polished, charismatic. He spoke about vision and transformation and the courage to reimagine what a city could become. He used words like infrastructure value proposition and secondary market development. He used the framework Lenora had built. He presented it as his own. And then James stood. The room fell silent the way a room does when genuine power prepares to speak. Not the managed silence of politeness, the instinctive silence of recognition. Thank you, Vincent, for that compelling vision, James began. I would like to add some context about how this investment came together. As many of you know, the consortium conducts extensive due diligence. We do not invest based on pitch alone. We require rigorous, independent analysis. He paused. The silence in the ballroom was complete. For Pacific Tower, we commissioned an independent assessment from one of our most trusted strategic consultants, someone with deep expertise in urban development, value creation, and long-term market strategy. That assessment became the foundation of our entire investment decision. Another pause. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. I would like to acknowledge that consultant now. Lenora Whitmore, would you please stand? 300 heads turned. Lenora stood slowly, heart hammering, expression calm. Lenora's analysis identified the 7-year value recapture model that became central to this project's financial structure, James said. Her insights about infrastructure investment versus development risk reframed how we understood the opportunity entirely. Without her strategic framework, this consortium might not have come together. Applause filled the room, not polite applause, the real kind, the kind that comes from genuine recognition of contribution. Many of you know the Whitmore name in investment circles, James continued. Lenora represents the next generation of that legacy. We are fortunate to have her expertise. Lenora sat. The room buzzed. Connections were being made. Assumptions were being dismantled. Every person who had ever categorized her as Vincent Prescott's pleasant, quiet wife was recalibrating everything they thought they knew. And Vincent stood on the stage where he had just delivered the speech of his career, watching his entire narrative restructure itself in real time, watching the room turn toward the woman he had handed divorce papers to 3 weeks ago, watching the invisible become undeniable. Later, the balcony, night air, the city spread below them like a circuit board of light and ambition. Vincent found her. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the sudden collapse of a story you have been telling yourself for years. Everyone is talking about you, he said. Let them. You have been playing me for 3 years. I have not been playing you. I have been trying to be your wife. You are the one who turned it into a performance by keeping score of whose ambition mattered more. If I had known who you were, who your family was. Stop, Lenora said. Stop saying that. If you had known, you would have treated me as a strategic asset instead of a person. You would have leveraged my family's connections. You would have used my access to open doors for your deals. But you still would not have seen me, Vincent. You would have just recognized my utility. And utility is not love. He leaned against the railing. The wind moved through his hair. For a moment he looked young, uncertain, like the man who had proposed to her in a restaurant 2.5 years ago, with a ring he had picked himself and a speech about building futures together. I did love you, he said. I need you to know that. I believe you, Lenora said. You loved the version of me you understood, the quiet version, the convenient version. When the version that did not need anything from you and gave you everything without asking for credit. That love was real. It just was not enough. What would have been enough? Seeing me, all of me, not the parts that were comfortable for you, but the parts that might have challenged you. My intelligence, my strategic mind, my family, my independence. If you had seen all of that and loved me anyway, not because of what it could do for you, but because it was who I am, that would have been enough. Vincent was quiet for a long time. The city hummed below them. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Vivian was waiting. The future he had chosen. The partner who understood what it takes to operate at this level. Evelyn thinks you are trying to sabotage us, he said finally. I do not care about Vivian, Lenora replied. And I am not trying to sabotage anything. I am trying to finalize a divorce with an accurate accounting of assets. That is not sabotage. That is due diligence. She turned to go. Ana then stopped, turned back. One more thing, Vincent. Vivian performs strength. She performs ambition and challenge and intelligence. And you are drawn to that performance the same way you were drawn to my performance of simplicity. But performance is not partnership. Eventually the role gets exhausting. And when it does, when she stops being able to sustain it, you will do to her exactly what you did to me. You will look for someone new who performs the next thing you think you need. Not because you are cruel, because you do not know how to love a person. You only know how to love a role. She walked away before he could answer, back through the ballroom, past the champagne and the speeches and the glittering machinery of wealth-performing generosity, out through the lobby, into the night. Her phone rang as she reached her car. Her father. I heard about the speech, he said. There was pride in his voice. The specific kind of pride that comes from watching someone you love finally allow themselves to be seen. It was unexpected, Lenora said. Was it? James has been wanting to acknowledge your work for years. You finally let him. I did not let him do anything. I just stopped hiding. That is exactly what I mean. Power is not just resources, Lenora. It is the willingness to be visible in your capability. You have always had both. You just forgot you were allowed to use them at the same time. And they talked for a few more minutes. Nothing heavy. Just a father and a daughter finding their way back to each other after 3 years of respectful distance. When Lenora hung up, she sat in her car and let the silence settle around her. She thought about the past 3 years, the experiments she had run on her own heart. Could she be loved without context? Could someone choose her without knowing what her last name unlocked? The answer was yes, but only as long as she remained small. The moment she needed to be her full self, the love evaporated. Not because Vincent was a villain, because he had fallen in love with her incompleteness. And when the complete version appeared, he did not recognize her. They were both wrong. She had hidden herself and then resented him for not finding her. He had accepted the surface and then been shocked by the depth. Two people performing versions of themselves that could not sustain a real marriage. But only one of them was ready to stop performing. And that made all the difference. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Karen negotiated terms that were fair, accurate, and based on forensic reality rather than Vincent's assumptions about his wife's worth. The settlement was signed, the paperwork filed. Lenora kept the house because she could afford to buy Vincent out completely. His surprise at this was the last expression of his she bothered to register. In the final document signing took place in a conference room. 2 attorneys, 2 signatures, the bureaucratic conclusion of a 3-year experiment in love and invisibility. I hope you will be happy, Vincent said as they stood to leave. I hope the same for you, Lenora replied, and she meant it. Whatever anger she had carried had dissolved. What remained was clarity and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she deserved more than being someone's convenient version of a wife. Her Vivian was waiting in the lobby. She stood when she saw Vincent, territorial and uncertain in equal measure. Lenora walked past without acknowledgement, not out of cruelty, out of irrelevance. Their story had nothing to do with her anymore. 2 months later, Lenora sat in her father's boardroom. The room was full of people who managed generational wealth, people who had been making decisions that shaped markets since before she was born. She stood at the head of the table and presented her vision for expanding the family's philanthropic portfolio, for using wealth not just as a tool for growth, but as a vehicle for cultural preservation, public access, and long-term value creation, measured in generations rather than quarters. The board listened. They asked hard questions. She answered with precision, to drawing on knowledge she had spent years accumulating quietly while the world assumed she was arranging flowers and attending luncheons. When she finished, her father spoke. I believe we have our answer about succession, he said simply. The vote was unanimous. That evening she attended a gallery opening, not as anyone's wife, not as her father's daughter performing obedience, as herself. Lenora Whitmore, curator, strategist, board member, in heir to a legacy she was finally willing to carry in full view. She moved through the gallery with the ease of someone who has stopped apologizing for taking up space. She spoke with artists, collectors, directors, real conversations with real people who saw her and valued what they saw without needing it explained or justified. And then, across the room, she noticed someone, a man standing in front of a sculpture, not glancing at it, not performing interest for someone else's benefit. He's studying it, reading the placard, tilting his head, considering the work with the genuine attention of someone who cared about what he was looking at, not what it could do for him. He looked up. Their eyes met across the gallery, and he smiled. Not a strategic smile, not a networking smile, just a smile. The kind of smile that says, I see something interesting, and I would like to know more. Lenora smiled back. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. She did not know if this moment would become a sentence or a chapter or an entire book. But she knew one thing with the kind of certainty that lives in the bones, beneath thought, beneath doubt, beneath all the noise the world makes when it tries to tell you who you should be. She would not make herself small, not for him, not for anyone, not ever again. She would not hide her intelligence. She would not downplay her expertise. She would not erase her family name or her capabilities or her power so that someone else could feel more comfortable standing beside her. She would be Lenora Whitmore, fully, completely, without apology or abbreviation. And if that was too much for him, he was not the right person. And she would be fine. Because she had learned through 3 years of pain and silence and slow awakening that being alone and whole is infinitely better than being accompanied and invisible. But if he had room for her fullness, if he could see her capability and celebrate it instead of feeling threatened by it, if he could stand beside her as a partner, rather than positioning her as scenery in the background of his life, then maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. Not love built on performance, not devotion that required disappearance, but partnership between two whole people who had room, one wide and generous and joyful room for each other's enormity. She did not know yet, and for the first time in years, not knowing felt like freedom. Now, before I let you go, I need to speak to you directly, because what happened to Lenora is not just her story. It is a pattern. It plays out in boardrooms and bedrooms, in marriages and friendships, in families and workplaces, every single day. And if we do not name it, if we do not understand what it teaches, we risk repeating it with our own lives. What you just heard was not a revenge story. Lenora did not destroy Vincent to prove she was superior. She did not weaponize her family's fortune. She did not orchestrate a dramatic public humiliation. She simply stopped hiding. And the truth, once it was visible, did everything else on its own. Here is the lesson, and I need you to hear it clearly. There is a difference between being loved for who you are and being loved for who you are willing to pretend to be. Those are not the same thing. And if you have been spending your life making yourself smaller, quieter, simpler, more convenient, so that someone else can feel comfortable, you are not building a relationship. You are building a prison with your own hands and handing someone else the key. Devotion says, I will support you. Self-abandonment says, I will disappear so you can shine. When they sound similar, they feel similar in the moment, but they lead to completely different places. One leads to partnership. The other leads to erasure. And erasure is a slow kind of death that happens while you are still breathing. If you are in a relationship right now, romantic, professional, familial, any kind, where you have to edit yourself to be accepted, pay attention to that feeling. That feeling is a signal. It is your full self knocking on the door of a room you have locked it inside. I'm asking to be let out. If someone has had years to see you and they are still choosing not to, that is not about your worth. That is about their capacity. And you cannot fix someone else's limited capacity by making yourself smaller. You cannot love someone into seeing you. You can only decide how long you are willing to be invisible. So here is my prayer for you today. Wherever you are, whatever you are facing, whatever room you have been making yourself small inside, I pray that you find the courage to be your full self, even when it is inconvenient for the people around you. I pray that you attract people who have the capacity to see you, all of you, and the wisdom to celebrate what they see. I pray that you recognize erasure when it is happening and that you have the strength to refuse it. You are not too much. You have just been around people who are too little, and there is a world of difference between those two things. Choose yourself. Reclaim your voice, step into your fullness, and trust that the right people will have room for everything you are. If this story touched something inside you, if you have ever felt invisible or overlooked or like you had to shrink to be chosen, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. We are building a family here at Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis, a community of people who understand that true wealth is not about money. It is about wholeness. It is about being seen and valued and celebrated for who you really are. So subscribe right now, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to choose between being loved and being yourself? What did you choose? What would you choose now? Share this with someone who needs to hear that their visibility matters, that their contributions count, that they do not have to stay small to be chosen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for choosing yourself, especially when it is hard. I will see you in the next story. This is Mr. Lewis reminding you, you are seen, you are valued, you are enough.